Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to our Detoxification for Everyone webinar. We're really excited to have everyone here. We're going to be going over something that is really near and dear to my heart. A lot of people know that detoxification is something that I specialize in. I absolutely love environmental medicine, so I'm excited to be making this a little bit more approachable, a little less doomsday-y, and hopefully just a nice conversation about different common toxins that we come into contact with, why toxicity matters for our health. And yeah, we'll get into some specifics about how it might be applicable for you.
I'm going to mute myself.
Amazing. And Julie, I'm just sending you a request to share my screen. Perfect, thank you. And then we can get into our slides. So yes, detoxification for everyone, understanding toxicity and health. So toxicity is something that the word toxin, toxicity, cleanse, detox has definitely a negative connotation. And this has a lot to do with really the wellness world culture that has perpetuated more cleanses. I mean, anyone who goes on Instagram or TikTok these days can see videos of different health professionals telling you how terrible everything is. You're going through grocery store aisles or personal care products and people telling you that everything is going to kill you, everything causes cancer. And it's when we have that extreme of opinions, it really breeds a lot of skepticism about the validity of what people are saying. And, how much do I actually have to care? How much are these things actually impacting my health? So, we're going to come to the conversation with a much more reasonable and rational approach, and also a really evidence based approach. So we're going to be able to, yeah, talk about how something that actually does have a pretty significant impact on people's health for some people and how we can really alter our everyday practices and really figure out how these things are affecting you personally. So this conversation becomes a lot more nuanced and a lot less doomsday and a lot less of like, I'm just going to have a juice cleanse and approach it that way. So yes, we're going to make this more approachable. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite books of all time is many patients want to point to the one chemical exposure that initiated their illness as the only compound that made them ill. In reality, the symptom initiating exposure merely overloaded an already taxed homeostatic balance, leading to a health crisis. Then this is from the textbook Clinical Environmental Medicine. And what does this mean? It means that in the world of detoxification and environmental medicine and environmental illness, it's never just one thing. And so many times when we are working with clients at Rev or just human nature in general, we really want a silver bullet. We want to understand it really is this one thing. It's this one toxin that's causing my symptoms. It's whether that's mold, whether that's phthalates, whether it's heavy metals. We want to be able to clearly understand something. And that is so human nature. We want an A plus B equals C. The reality is that by the time you're getting sick, like this quote says, you have a symptom initiating exposure. Now, all of a sudden, it's very noticeable that you're not feeling well. The toxicity has built up in the body. This happens over often decades. Sometimes it happens before we are even born. We'll get into that a little bit. So by the time we get to this point that we are actually ill, there's a lot of work that has to be done in order to detox. And usually it's many things that are combining together that's causing tons of irritation in the body. So in reality, it's never just one thing, it's many things. And when we can approach it this way, it becomes a little bit more approachable. We don't have to demonize things if we know where to look. So, real quick, let's check in with our symptoms. Are you experiencing any of the following? Constipation. And constipation means we are not having a bowel movement daily. Constipation can mean that you're having a bowel movement maybe every other day, but ideally you're having 1 to 3 bowel movements that are formed daily. If you have any kinds of skin issues, if you're having acne, psoriasis, eczema, hives, or rashes, if you're experiencing brain fog, lacking mental clarity, or fatigue, if I know, Julie, 1 to 3, three. I know. So this is a really common a lot of people do not hit the 3 bowel movements in a day. If you are someone who's really struggling with toxicity, one of the goals is that we are really getting your digestion up and running more frequently. So you are getting things out through your colon and through your large intestine more regularly. For those of us who don't necessarily struggle with that much accumulated toxicity, 1 is okay, but 2 or 3 actually is pretty healthy. And this just goes to show there's so much lacking fiber in our diets in general that that has become like kind of unrealistic for so many people, but we can get there. So then we get into lower energy and fatigue. Fatigue, telltale sign something might be going on. Temperature regulation issues. Are you feeling cold really frequently? Especially do you have cold hands and feet? Is the rest of your body okay? But you notice that maybe your fingertips get blue, like in Raynaud syndrome, or it's really difficult to warm up your toes. Blood sugar crashes. Are you feeling like you're really dipping between meals? That your lips are turning blue if you're not eating every 4 hours, that you're getting cold or agitated if you're not eating more frequently? Do you have irregular menstrual cycles or issues with stamina for men? Telltale sign something's going on. Or are you struggling with anxiety or depression? If you answered yes to one, even one or more of these symptoms, it's definitely time to evaluate toxins in your picture. All of these symptoms are a little bit more systemic, and we're going to explain where each one might be coming from, but all signs that toxicity might be playing a picture in your health picture when these symptoms are a little bit more vague and they're a little bit more underlying, like not something you necessarily see a physician for, but something, a sign that something is off and out of balance. So now we're going to go into understanding what our drainage organs are and what the drainage funnel is. And this is so important to understanding how toxins go in and out of your body and how they affect people differently. So this image is courtesy of Cellcore Biosciences, which is a fantastic supplement company that we sometimes recommend to our clients depending on their picture. And on this left side here, we have what a normal and healthy drainage system looks like. So on this bottom level here, you have the colon, and this is our large intestine or our gut microbiome. We need our colon to be in really excellent shape. We need the bacteria levels to be balanced. We need the cell junctions to be really tight, and leaky gut is when we have a breakdown of these cell junctions. We need to be eliminating at least once daily, like we discussed. Our colon health is really, it's going to be our biggest source to getting things to move out of the body through our bowel movements that we come into contact with. Above that is our liver and bile ducts. So now we're getting into how our liver supports and surrounds our GI system and our bile that really binds to toxins and brings things out of the body, which is super, super important. Next, we have our lymphatic system, which again surrounds the liver, it surrounds the colon, and really supports our lymph nodes. A lot of them are located, about 2/3 are located in the neck and face alone. So, our lymphatic system really protecting our brain, leading to organs and tissues. We need our brain to be really well protected, and particularly one of the most essential organs for detoxification. And then the overarching theme is our cells. So, we need our cells, the mitochondria, as you may remember from elementary school science class. Our mitochondria, the energy center of our cells, really need to function optimally in order for the rest, the below of this funnel to work. So we need to be able to have them adequate nutrients and adequate antioxidants. Now, if we look on the right-hand side, we start to see how when things get really imbalanced, what starts to happen. So if we start down at the bottom again, if the colon is not in great shape, if we have gut dysbiosis, if we have leaky gut issues, we start to have already a buildup of toxins happening in the body because we're not eliminating them effectively or often enough. This is when we see when we get up to this liver and bile ducts, next ladder on the next rung on the ladder, there's kind of this escape latch that happens out on the side. So we start to see issues, especially come up through the skin. Now, if we're not eliminating through the digestive tract, the body needs somewhere to push whatever toxicity is being accumulated, especially in the liver. So, the first go to is going to be your skin. This is when people start getting hives, super common with toxicity. Acne, that's a little bit more than hormonal acne. Sometimes hormonal acne will be on the chin. So, if it's other areas around your face, especially the temples, on the cheeks, the forehead, we start thinking about accumulated toxicity. The kidneys will also take a hit. So, oftentimes, when I'm looking at people's blood work, looking at their EGFR markers, which is more of their body's water filter markers, understanding how are the kidneys being impacted here. The lungs also can take a hit as well. So, we'll talk a little bit about this on the next slide, but the microbiome and the lungs are highly, highly related. They share a biome together. So, sometimes people with toxicity will experience chronic coughs that just don't quite go away, or they feel like they're really hit with different kinds of infections, like sinus infections, that have to do with our respiratory health. So we start to see this happen here. And then inevitably, our lymphatic system gets really clogged up. Maybe we're getting really puffy. Maybe our face, especially, looks a little puffy and it feels like it's not draining. Maybe we're noticing some swelling around our ankles. That's really common. Maybe our organs and tissues then get impacted. Maybe our thyroid starts to really struggle, this gland that sits in our neck. Maybe we start experiencing brain fog because now our brain isn't having a chance to detoxify. And then this overarching theme on the top, the cells, the mitochondria, they just aren't working as optimally anymore. So you start to see, the left here, when people are really in regulation and they're functioning optimally, toxins can come in and out of the body. Our bodies are so resilient, they can handle so much. And there's all of these mechanisms in place for it to handle toxin exposure. So this shouldn't be a super big deal. But when things get backed up, whether there's too much toxin exposure and or some really stalled toxin glands, like if there's some gut dysbiosis in the colon, especially if the liver needs more support. For women, I see this all the time if they've been on birth control for many years. Now their liver is really stalled and stagnant. And so their liver isn't working effectively. And then you start to see the ripple effect. So, how can we go from this right picture here, this left picture here? And then we think about more of the traditional Chinese medicine picture, which really just reiterates everything we just saw on this previous slide. So if you look down here at this metal element, the colon, which is associated with the metal element, is paired with the lungs. They are best friend organs in traditional Chinese medicine. So inevitably, anything that happens in the colon is going to be manifesting in the lungs as well. Like we talked about, this escape valve that you experience these coughs or sinus infection issues. You'll see this red arrow pointing to the liver. When the colon gets overburdened, the liver gets overburdened. So Chinese medicine knew this, I mean, centuries ago, that when we have issues in the colon, in the lungs, that the liver and the gallbladder, these really important detoxification organs, are really going to struggle and they're going to take the majority of the hit. And then we see down here, the colon then overflows into the bladder and the kidneys. So we saw our kidneys take a hit. So these ancient philosophers, I mean, energy medicine is still considered a little bit more woo, but when you understand the philosophy and you see they understood truly the interrelation of all these symptoms and these systems, that you start to see, wow, they really had it figured out. They really understood that all of these systems were so interrelated, especially when it comes to detoxification. So, why are some people way more impacted than others in terms of toxicity? And anyone who's struggling with any kind of chronic based illness, or they are just feeling a lot more sensitive to the people around them, this is like the age old question. Like, why am I being impacted by these things way more than even people that I could be living in the same environment with, people that I'm sharing spaces with? My relationship partner, my parents. Why is this affecting me so much more than someone else? And it's so frustrating for these people because oftentimes, again, these symptoms, they're really vague and they could be anything. And it's really easy when you're in that position to think, like, well, maybe I am just anxious, or, maybe my digestion is just a little bit off. But knowing that maybe deep down something else might be going on here. So there is a little bit of a genetic component. We love to say you can change the expression of your genes, and that's absolutely true when you have the appropriate tools. So some gene mutations that can really interfere with detoxification abilities are GST, which is glutathione s-transferase. This is a genetic mutation that makes it really difficult for some people to produce our body's biggest and largest antioxidant. So if we don't have enough antioxidants, it's really easy for toxicity to build up. And then the MTHFR gene mutation, this has gotten a lot of press lately, and for good reason. People with the MTHFR genetic variation have really difficult time methylating, and this is how we produce energy and we get cells to turn over. So if we are having a really hard time methylating and producing energy and getting rid of the waste products of that energy, things can accumulate. This is when things like B vitamins get to be really, really important for these people. SOD2, superoxide dismutase 2, another antioxidant genetic mutation, really important. The CYP450 enzyme genetic mutations, there are lots of CYP450 enzymes that exist in the liver. So sometimes if we have these genetic mutations, part for the liver to detoxify certain things. And then the HLA-DR, the human like leukocyte antigen, this makes it really challenging for our body to produce antibodies to certain toxins. So a lot of people, sometimes with mold, are really impacted by this, as well as celiac disease. So there is a genetic component, and I personally don't find as much value in testing for genetic mutations as I do looking at lab work and understanding that there is likely a propensity to something going on. So something to think about. And then we have other factors. We have humid climates. If you live in a humid climate, you're much more likely to come into contact with mold. So if you live in any kind of higher humidity climate, that's very likely. Old buildings, Boston, everything is so old here. So we're talking about old pipes where you may experience lead in the water, or potentially again mold, or maybe there's old paint that was painted over. So something that could be impacting the air quality as well. Traffic dense areas, if you live in a city, you're more likely to be inhaling exhaust. There have been many, many studies done on that at this point. Contaminated water runoff, if you grew up or live near a golf course, you're more likely to experience a lot of pesticide exposure. Also, other chemicals, like if you live near a factory farm, there have been a lot of studies done that that really does contaminate the water supply. So that's really important to think about. Lower income communities have higher toxin exposure and less resources to be able to combat it. So that is something to think about. Less nutrient availability in general. Our food is much less nutrient dense. So again, we need these antioxidants to combat a lot of the toxins we're exposed to. So if we don't have as much nutrient density in our food, it's really difficult with this nutrient availability. And then firstborn children are unfortunately more likely to have much significantly higher toxin body burdens than their siblings. When women become pregnant, and this is something that I am so passionate talking about, if there is stored toxin accumulation, which isn't the case for everyone, but if there is stored toxicity, some of that can be passed through the placenta. So when a woman is pregnant for the first time, their firstborn child tends to get a little bit more of that heavier load of what was stored and accumulated in their bodies. So oftentimes I see with my clients that firstborn children, that can be a factor in their picture. So some people it's more genetic, some people it's more situational or other factors. And for a lot of people who are experiencing more of a chronic based health picture, it's both. So they somehow find themselves with these underlying genetic mutations and in a humid climate or these genetic mutations, and maybe they were a firstborn child, and it sort of is this perfect storm where all of a sudden they're having a lot of toxicity in their body doesn't then quite know what to do with. So we're going to be going over a few common environmental pollutants, and these are all things that we test for. So we'll be looking at different test results and seeing what things look like. So we are going to start with heavy metals. So this is just a portion of the whole report that we go over looking at hair heavy metal analysis. And our heavy metal, we do the test through hair. It's much safer and it shows what the body is actively trying to push out through the tissues. And hair is one of the safest tissues to do so. So heavy metals they're really toxic and very corrosive elements. So when we do come into contact with them, our body is so smart and it's going to store them in places that's going to cause the least amount of damage. So glands are really good for this. Our thyroid sits in our neck, has a huge propensity to attract mercury. It can sit here for a long time in our thyroid and just kind of hang out. Same with lead, it has a huge propensity for our kidneys and for our bones. So it can sit in these tissues really safely and just hang out there. And it really doesn't become an issue until it becomes an issue. So if we're dealing with other factors that are then going to impact the thyroid, maybe then that mercury becomes a problem. If we're dealing with bone loss, that's very normal in later stages of life. Maybe that lead then becomes a problem. And we see this with heavy metal toxicity leading to and contributing to conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia. And there is definitely a correlation with this toxicity level here. So understanding that heavy metals, they add on more of a chronic immune-based response in the body. So this isn't something that you're going to notice right away. It isn't something that is more, unless it's an acute poisoning, which is so rare now, these are things that your immune system is going to be chronically under the surface fighting. And again, like we saw that quote in the beginning, this isn't usually something that's going to be noticed unless it is the symptom that tips things over. With heavy metals, unless you're eating tons of tuna fish or large water fish where you're getting high levels of mercury, it's very rare that this is an acute issue. Oftentimes, this can be inherited from our parents, from mercury or lead. I see that very often. Another big source of mercury can come from mercury amalgams in generations. Usually, this is around 40 plus. Dentistry no longer uses mercury amalgams, but mercury amalgams in the mouth can sometimes lead to elevated mercury levels. We have a client right now who is working getting their mercury amalgams out because of a tested high mercury on their labs. Lead can come from generations prior to, like in lead paint. I mean, this is the things that our grandparents dealt with that sometimes can get passed along to us if it accumulated in their body. And aluminum is probably the most common one, and it's not listed on this snapshot in particular, but we do test for it because aluminum is in so many things. It's in our soda cans, it's on our baking sheets. And again, some people don't hold on to heavy metals very easily, but if you have the genetic propensity to, or maybe you're surrounded by a lot of aluminum and you're using it every day and frequently, this may be something that actually is accumulating in your body. So then we're going to move on to parabens and phthalates. Parabens and phthalates are included in our environmental pollutants panel. And I included a screenshot of that here. We test for several other things, but I'll touch on parabens and phthalates today. This first one's styrene here. It's really common to see that's elevated in anyone who sleeps on a memory foam mattress or has memory foam pillows. So I'll just throw that out there if that is something you are still utilizing. It has been shown to be a little bit estrogenic. It often comes up almost always in someone who has a memory foam mattress. So something to think about. But phthalates are a plasticizer. They help make plastics a little bit more malleable and bendable. And parabens are a preservative. They are both very estrogenic in nature. So it can really act like an estrogen within our body. This whole environmental pollutants panel, and phthalates and parabens in particular, they come out in and out of the body really quickly. So we have an exposure, it's usually pretty minor, and our body can process it, and it's really fully out of the body within a few days to max a couple weeks. This doesn't affect our system that dramatically. But the issue is that when we're having these exposures every single day, whether it's through personal care products are really common to parabens and phthalates, and especially parabens in any kind of makeup or cosmetics or shampoo and conditioner, acting as this preservative, almost like an antibiotic to prevent things from going bad and preventing bacteria from growing in these substances. If we're exposed to it every single day, this is when the estrogen effect starts to be really, really chronic. So now we have something that we're even in micro doses exposed to on a daily basis that is really shifting our estrogen receptors and hormone levels. And when that happens, we have to start thinking about things like estrogen specific and receptive cancers that can be really heavily influenced by these chronic exposures. So, is this something that's going to affect you on a day to day basis? Of course not. Our bodies, again, are so resilient, they can handle it. And if you go stay, I had a client ask recently, like, if I go stay at a hotel, and I stay at a hotel once a quarter, is it okay to use the shampoo? Oh my gosh, of course, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. But do I want you using a shampoo at home that has parabens or phthalates? Do I want you using a perfume every morning that probably has phthalates? Phthalates are really associated with fragrances. No, because that's something you're going to be utilizing every single day. And then we start to see really the shift in hormones and creating an environment in the body that's more estrogenic. We don't want that because we know the downstream effects can lead to things that we don't want. Cancer being one of them, fibroids is another one, or just estrogen dominance in general, really painful, awful periods. So being really mindful about our environmental exposures from more of an everyday standpoint is really important. And then mold toxicity. Mold is just one of those toxins that can be so corrosive, and not everyone is sensitive to mold. About 2/3 of the population really has no issues with mold. They come into contact with it, their immune system recognizes it, your body can excrete it really easily. And when we looked at that healthy drainage pathway, it just kind of goes right through. There's really nothing gets stalled or stagnant. People can exist mostly pretty fine in mold, especially if the exposures are a little bit on the lower end. But when we have someone in this one third camp of the population, about one third of the population, mold is just so hard for them to process. And instead of it being recognized by the immune system, the body has a genetic propensity to not create antibodies to mold. So now we have a problem where there's not an adequate immune response. The body can't fight it. And it tries to go out through the digestive system. And instead of being bound to it by our bile, that really gets things out through our stool, it gets recirculated. So it really is this vicious cycle of these exposures that accumulate over time. And then the body goes into what's called chronic inflammatory response syndrome with mold. So even looking at this was an example from one of our clients that we worked with here. We test for 5 strains of mold. There are 4 listed here. This one level up on the top left-hand corner, I mean, astronomical levels of mold. This client was experiencing really vague symptoms. No one could figure it out, what was going on. Lots of anxiety, dizziness, fatigue, blood sugar crashes, all the same symptoms that I described when we did that first check-in on the second slide. And again, it was just really vague. And this client had said, I don't know, I just sort of normalized my experience. And then we did this mold panel, and I mean, this level is through the roof. It's very, very, very high, along with some other strains here. Not quite as high, but still very, very elevated. So this is someone who has a genetic propensity to not be able to detox mold. And we can see that really obviously here by how much her body's holding on to it. It's not going to be able to let it go on its own. So our job now knowing that this is someone that they're really sensitive to, we can pull the mold out from their body safely and effectively. We can give them the nutrients that they need and give them the understanding that moving forward, this is something that they're going to have to manage. When they go into new homes, you may want to get tested, your mold levels tested first. If you are experiencing the same symptoms you experienced previously, now there's a direct correlation. Maybe there's a little bit of mold accumulation here. This is absolutely something that can be managed and these levels brought down. And now we know this about ourselves moving forward. So it adds a lot of clarity. So mold is one of those toxins that it can be specific, especially genetically. And then lifestyle exposures, pesticides. I think a study came out just the other day about how toxic pesticides really are, that they are truly carcinogenic, that if anyone wants to get really scared, you can read the book by Stephanie Seneff. She is an MIT professor that talks all about glyphosate and just how corrosive it truly is. And it can really embed in our tissues really easily. So this is something that can be detoxed, but the best practice for pesticide exposure is avoidance. So really buying organic whenever you possibly can. Our food system is so broken, so much needs to be fixed. But understanding that we can really help our own exposures if we can really limit how much inorganic food or non-organic food we're consuming. So buying organic whenever possible. And again, use your best judgment here. If you're eating primarily organic most days, you can go out to dinner and not worry about it. That's okay. But if you're eating organic most of your meals or the meals you cook at home, that's really wonderful. And I am a huge proponent of investing in things that you are utilizing daily and most exposed to. Someone asked me recently, what do you think about rebounding machines? I think they're fine, but if we don't have air filters and water filters, like that's where you're going first, because these are the things that are really going to give you more bang for your buck. And it's something that you're exposed to all day, every day. So our indoor air quality is really poor. It's much more poor than our outdoor air quality, even when you're living in a city. So making sure that we're opening windows frequently. We all have furniture at this point that has some kind of flame retardant on it, and these things off gas. So especially if you're getting new furniture, new rugs, you just want to make sure you're opening up those windows, letting these things air out. And even if you have older furniture, opening up the windows more frequently and letting fresh air in is super important. And making sure we're really cleaning up our tap water. So you can go on the environmental working group and they have a tap water database. You can see what contaminants are in your tap water, and it is a little bit horrifying. So understanding that the water that we're drinking on a day-to-day basis should be filtered. There's just too many areas that are way too similar to Flint, Michigan that are advertised. And really filtering out the tap water that you're exposed to that can contain heavy metals or antibiotic residue or birth control residue, different hormones, and often can have pesticide runoff, and can be even a source of parasite exposure. So, really, really important to filter your tap water, especially the ones that you're drinking more regularly. So, that's important. And the water filters that I typically recommend are two. You can do a carbon filter one. Berkey is great. It's a little less aesthetically pleasing. It sits on the countertop. It's pretty big. So some people don't like that. And then reverse osmosis, I love. There are several brands that have countertop options and that are like a little pitcher countertop option, which I think is great. And they're a little bit more affordable. And the brand for that I really like is AquaTrue, but there are several on the market at this point that are really, really wonderful. So something to consider there. And then this picture here just goes to show the toxic bucket theory of chronic disease. This picture is courteous of Dr. Jess. And we really start to see, when we have this first picture here on the left, this is when we were probably not experiencing any symptoms. Nothing's going on. Everything's fine, but there's some stuff still there. When we get to this halfway point, we have things that are accumulating. Our body's maybe starting to lose a little bit of resiliency. Maybe there's a few things going on here, but nothing too noticeable. But when we have this overburden, this is really when we start to get in the chronic disease picture. This is when we have the one toxin that all of a sudden just really we are now in a health crisis, that we're experiencing rheumatoid arthritis, an autoimmune disease, inflammatory bowel disease, panic attacks, anxiety, depression, you name it. This is when we usually are in this full blown, my total toxin bucket is really overflowed. So ideally, we don't want you to be here. We want you to this image on the left when there's just a little bit of accumulated toxicity. Okay, great. How can we work through these things and now know these things about ourselves that we can manage really effectively? Even this halfway point, no problem. And of course, we have some clients who are in this blue zone as well, and we will help you out. But if we can test this a lot earlier and clear these things up more often, it's a much easier experience. And it's a lot easier on our bodies, and it's a lot easier on us emotionally too. So, in terms of detoxification solutions, toxin body burden evaluation, knowledge is going to be power here. So again, it's really hard to guess what toxins have been accumulated in your body because we don't really experience symptoms again until we're like the sad little blue man. So if we can get to a place that we have a full understanding about what our toxin body burden currently is in this moment, we can do a lot of work to say like, oh, I actually, I don't have a propensity to carry a lot of heavy metals or mold or environmental pollutants. And then we can make an educated decision about how we want to move forward. I mean, absolute worst case scenario from doing that is you have the knowledge that your body processes toxins really well, and that is an absolute gift to know. And the best case scenario is you find some interesting things going on about yourself and that you have the ability to get these things out of your body. So, and it might be an answer to some of the health pictures and symptoms you've been experiencing. Investing in a water filter, like we just talked about, either doing a carbon filter like a Berkey or reverse osmosis system, is huge since this is something we are exposed to all day, every day. Open your windows often, like we talked about. And if you are sensitive to mold, I always recommend people get an air filter. Not everyone needs an air filter. If you live in a high traffic area, I always recommend one. If you're sensitive to mold, definitely. Otherwise, opening the windows at least for 5 minutes a day is really perfect. So you can do that. Check toxicity for daily use products. So again, thinking about those parabens, phthalates, how can we check? And there's several websites at this point. The Environmental Working Group has a database. There are several different apps for toxicity for the daily products that I use, making sure that these are ideally phthalate free and paraben free. So you're getting at least a temporary relief. If you have used things occasionally, that's okay. But making sure the ones you use every day fall into that category. Buy organic whenever possible. This is so important, especially when financially feasible. Regular lymph moving practices. So our lymphatic system, that really is a coding between all of our organs, has a lot to do with brain health, our lymphatic ducts and our lymph nodes in our neck. We have to move our lymph. It won't move on its own. things tend to get really stuck and stagnant. So there are certain practices that you can do. There's a lymphatic moving routine on our online community that I do at least once a day. It takes like maybe 90 seconds. So really easy to get your lymph moving. And there are other practices like rebounding that you can do. There's rebound machines or like trampolines. Honestly, you can just vibrate your body up and down by moving your heels up and down. It does the exact same thing, but you don't need to buy anything. So that is really wonderful. And then sauna use. So sauning often, and studies are more done on traditional use saunas than infrared saunas, but getting in a sauna and getting to sweat really regularly, very beneficial for the body. Your body's going to release heat shock proteins, which are really, really great at killing off organisms. It's really effective for heavy metal detoxification. It is absolutely essential for mold detoxification. And the studies do say the more often, the better. So if you can sauna, if it's appropriate for your health picture, and I really like people to be really careful about mineral status when they're sauning more regularly, making sure that you're getting in a sauna pretty often. And I try to aim for personally about 5 days a week, about like 30-minute sessions at a time around, I use an infrared currently, like 145 to 150 degrees. You want to build up your tolerance over time. Some people with their toxin burdens really can't handle that much in the beginning. So it's really important to get evaluated first. Where's your toxicity level burden at before utilizing a sauna to know how much you're pulling out of your body in that time. But this is a really good place to start. The testing is going to give you a lot of clarity about, does my body handle toxins well or not? Is this something that I actually do need to be a little bit more concerned about than I thought? Or am I pretty okay in this category? Can I be mindful about like pesticides and my daily products and just kind of go from there? And some people really can do that. And that's so wonderful. And some people just need a little bit more extra support, but you're only going to know that through testing. So, my suggestion to everyone is at some point, you definitely want to get this assessed just to know where you're at so it doesn't come as a surprise to you. And then we'll just open it up for questions. And I have a couple questions written down as well. So, if we don't have questions, we can go over those too.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, Julie, you're so welcome.
I have some questions too, but I want you to go first.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Um, I know people ask me all the time about dry brushing. Someone asked me about that recently. Does it really matter? Is it really impactful? Should we be doing dry brushing? My answer is there are many ways to move your lymph. I personally hate dry brushing. There's just something about it that I can't stand. I don't know if it's the brush or what, but there are many ways to move your lymph. If dry brushing feels good for you and it feels like a supportive practice and it feels like a supportive part of your day, I say go for it. If there are other practices that are going to resonate a little bit more and feel better, you can do that too. So don't buy into the rhetoric that there's absolutely one thing that you have to do this practice that you can't miss. It's not true. There are so many ways to accomplish the same thing. So if it's feeling good, I say yes.
The sauna, I got this one, I got two
Amazing.
people who couldn't join or tried to come, because if you join too late, the link won't work. If you haven't registered, the link doesn't work from,
Yes, that's right.
I don't know why that is. Okay, so if you don't have access to a sauna, can you order one of those things, like the higher dose, I guess, sauna wrap sleeping bag?
Yeah, the blankets. Yes, they work great. They are so accessible for a lot of people. They're more financially affordable. They're still expensive, but they are a little bit more financially affordable. And you're going to get the same effects. And you get to just lay on the ground and take a little nap. So a lot of people really love it. They're a little bit inconvenient to clean. But besides that, they are an amazing accessibility tool for sauna use. So if that is something that feels a little bit more accessible and better for you, absolutely.
Yeah. And then okay, and when this one too was near and dear to me was uh links between, and we can send some links as well, links between fibroids and the environmental toxins. Uh,
Yeah, totally.
As we know that I
As
have
we,
fibroids and fibroid surgery. So
yeah, oh my gosh, of course. So there's a whole school of thought that says that these fibroids are actually quite protective. They are potentially encapsulating a lot of toxicity and walling it off from the rest of the body. So when we start to think about and this is the perspective I approach all of our reports with, the body is always acting in your best interest. We might not like what it's doing and we might not understand it, but when we can approach something like fibroids, for example, with that approach, how is the body then really supporting me by creating these things? And then you start to see how toxicity might be coming into play here. Is this fibroid really walling off accumulated toxins that are happening in the body in combination with potentially these personal care products that are more estrogenic, that are promoting more estrogen dominance? So it's usually a combination of both. There's some sort of stored accumulated toxicity and the exposures that are continuing to promote more estrogen, that then you get the fibroids. And
I
then we sometimes pair that with stress as well.
Yeah, well, and it's never one thing either, right? It's
Absolutely, of course.
lots and
Lots of things.
exercise, stress, toxins. I mean, that's why we look at everything, not just one panel, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
sometimes it's a big story of a lot of things. Uh, Quite the story sometimes. Like,
That's right.
but I think you answered the other one, which was, what to focus on first. And I think you were saying, air filter, and like if you had to only choose like two things to put in your house to, help with pollutants in your house, for example.
Yeah, I mean, a water filter by far. I would say the tap water I never want anyone ideally drinking tap water. So that would be my absolute first and foremost. And honestly, an air filter probably wouldn't even be second. I think unless you're really sensitive to mold, then you got to prioritize that. But my second would be cleaner personal care products and cosmetics
Interesting.
because of those daily, like recurring exposures. But yeah, the air filter, unless it's specific to you, would
Right. Like if
probably
you
be
live
a
where I
third.
live.
Y- Exactly. Yes, if you're living in
Right,
like a high
downtown Boston. Yeah.
traffic area, of course. And yeah, as some of you know, I'm really sensitive to mold. So for me, my air filter runs 24/7, but not everyone is. So you don't have to necessarily.
Okay. Any other questions? I mean, happy April 1st.
Happy April. Oh my gosh, it is April 1st.
Well, I do think it's important to talk about that we're gonna do. So we're putting together sort of a spring detox, and it's for members only. So obviously anybody who's not a member can become a member, and we're gonna start it on Earth Day, which is April 22nd. So we're asking for anybody who's not a member, sign up before the 15th of April so that we can order some labs, including the detox and de-stress panel, so that we can run some of these labs for heavy metal and pollutants
Yeah,
and cortisol, which is a stress marker. And I'm out of my game here talking about like the specific tests, as Maddie.
doing great.
Everyone sign up by the 15th, or current members. And what we're going to do is going to be a 5-week program. So between Earth Day and Memorial Day, cleansing your body, detoxing your body for vibrancy. So not just to look better, but to feel better and, cleaner skin, and, flushing out some of these toxins, really understanding, so that by the time the summer rolls around, you'll feel better. You'll be more vibrant, right? So obviously there are some issues that we've detected with members that we're going to be looking at a long-term, 6 months, 8 months, potentially more of like some of the stuff that we see. But any step you take forward is a step forward, right? So start now, and in 5 weeks, you're going to be better. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to put the link probably on Instagram. We're still kind of working out the details with Skylar because it's going to involve nutrition. It's going to involve a little bit of sweating in multiple ways, including exercise and sauna, and just flushing everything out. So I get excited about that. I mean, you feel it, right? When you just emerge from the sauna or a really good workout and you've sweat through all your pores, and you know, you, it's a renewal. So
Yeah,
perfect time of year for it. But thank you, Maddie. I know that's a lot sometimes for people to be like, oh no, there's so much, our environment, it's terrible. And there's things you can do every day to make it better.
of course. And knowing your body is going to help alleviate so many of those concerns. So a lot of empowerment.
And most things, if not all, can be alleviated and eradicated.
That's
So
right.
me 2 fibroid surgeries and less than 2 years ago, and still doing great. Doing
Yeah,
great.
that's right. Amazing. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much, everyone.
Thank you,
And we hope
Maddie.
to see you at our 5-week challenge soon.
You know, good night.